This is Dolynny TV, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another edition of Edmonton Oilers Discussion. Here on a fine Saturday morning, a Saturday in which I haven't worked late today, a Saturday in which I come home and actually don't have anything going on, and a Saturday in which I finally have an idea of what to talk about for some Oilers news today. She's been a pretty dry past couple of days. There's been a couple things, but nothing really that worthy of a video at this point. It's kind of getting interesting, and I just couldn't come up with anything. So, let's get to what I do have to discuss, as I think the interesting part here for a lot of Oilers fans is, right, obviously the Hub City proposal, and then all of a sudden you get Alberta increasing outdoor gatherings to 50 people, which means things are about to hopefully snowball into more and more openness in our society and our economy and all that. Which means, you know what, you go start trending in that direction, the NHL is only steps away kind of deal. So, how does that impact the Oilers? Well, that impacts the Oilers in the fact that playoffs might be coming back. That impacts the Oilers in the chance that we've started to hear stuff about expanded rosters. All right, there was an Oilers Nation article about this, but I'm going to kind of take it to the more complicated level, not just one player focus, in which the Oilers, should they be allowed to expand their rosters for playoffs, right? And obviously that's kind of probably going to be the key now that Bakersfield's season is over. It gets dang complicated, right? So you talk about the forwards. That's a discussion I don't want to have, because the defense is the discussion I want to have. My goodness, the defense all year has been interesting. You've seen everything thrown at you under the sun kind of when it comes to the defense this year. So now the Oilers Nation article I mentioned, I believe Philip Broberg was in the headline about being on the expanded roster, but that's not where I'm going. I'm going more of a guy, Evan Bouchard, right? Evan Bouchard getting into the mix. Obviously, you've got William Lagesson in the mix, and that really, really complicates matters, because you've got, even if you throw in Broberg, so let's throw in Broberg, Bouchard, and Lagesson, three defenders from outside of the NHL roster as of when the NHL went on pause. Well, then that gives you 8 other defensemen in the NHL. So you're talking a pool of possibly 11 defensemen, which to a degree is a very good thing to have. But you've got Klefbom, Larson, Chris Russell, Darnell Nurse, Mike Green, Benning, Jones, and Bear on the NHL roster. So this is kind of that thing that we've talked about before. The Oilers roster, when things got healthy, was going to be complicated, but the Oilers roster with expanded rosters is not as complicated. And in fact, if they are allowed to expand the rosters when the NHL playoffs begin, resume, whatever happens here, essentially that solves the complication, if you get what I mean. Because then you no longer have, oh, we have 8 defenders, Mike Green's healthy, Jones is healthy, right? Lagesson's down in the minors. You no longer have to rotate in and out a piece depending on what's going on. This allows you, depending on how they set up expanded rosters, because mind you, right, we've never seen such a situation in which we're talking expanded rosters going into the playoffs. So, you know what, don't worry about that. Just go into the fact that, you know what, you don't have to shuffle pieces. You can play the pieces you want, and the other pieces are there, right? Essentially, you've got 11D, you've got 2 sets of D that you can rotate in and out. Obviously, that's not how it will happen. You imagine if you rotated Klefbom, Nurse, Larson, and somebody else for, say, a Lagesson, Bouchard, and Broberg. I don't see that happening. Not a friggin' chance. But you get where it's going, right? Is there's that opportunity to not have to make a decision. And the decision we were talking about was having to make between Green, Jones, and Benning, right? Now, you just play whoever's healthy, you play your best 6, and if you need to plug and play, you're able to plug and play without the expense of, as we were going to have to down the stretch for the 11 games, send somebody up, call somebody up, and in the playoffs have to wait for the series to be over kind of deal as well. So this is where it gets really interesting, because you don't have to wait for an injury to have those expanded rosters, right? So the question I have is exactly what the expanded rosters will look like. Will you be able to carry 10 defensemen? Will you be able to carry the 11 I've proposed? Will you only be able to carry an extra one? Like, obviously, what makes sense, and I think what would probably make the most sense, is allowing teams to carry 25 guys. So that would only really allow you to either carry an extra defenseman and a goalie, or an extra forward or goalie, and something like that. And obviously, I believe the Oilers would be more than likely to carry an extra goalie just to have that extra goalie there. Now, same thing as regular playoffs. If an injury happens, you should be able to call somebody up, right? So even though you have an expanded roster of say 25 and you didn't carry an extra goalie, you can't just play without a goalie on the bench, right? So that's the other side where it would probably get interesting as well, is how the expanded rosters work and then the expanded rosters. There's a lot of things to be considered here as I'm really getting through it in my own head, and this is absolutely nuts to consider that we could have so much to go through, right? And obviously you go to the goalie discussion, and who would you call up? Would you call up Stuart Skinner, who had a rough year in the minors? Would you call up Dylan Wells, who had a rough year? Would you call up Shane Starrett, hoping he's fully healthy? No, who knows if he's fully healthy? I don't know the extent of his latest injury, right? There's a lot to be asked right there. And then obviously up front, right? Marcus Granlund, the guy heading to the KHL after all this is done. Like, what's he doing? Then you've got Cooper Marody, who's had some NHL experience. You have Tyler Benson, who now has NHL experience. And Thomas Jurko, maybe he's healthy, maybe he's ready, who knows? Right? We've already discussed him. Joseph Gambardella, Josh Curry, Brad Malone, all guys that could see NHL time depending on expanded rosters and the availability of injuries and such as that. Because even though the Oilers would then have an expanded roster, for instance, being allowed to re-add Joakim Nygard off of LTIR, right? Like, that's 15 forwards. So, okay, there you go. You've got the problem solved up front as well. But the defense, I think, in any inevitability of expanded rosters, really, really gets the interesting card on this. But you look at the forward group, my goodness, forward group gets interesting as well, because then you've got Nygard in there, you've got Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, James Neal, Athanasiou, you've got Chason, you've got Kazian, you've got Kara, you've got Archibald, Haas, Sheehan, Yamamoto, Ennis, Patrick Russell, add in Joakim Nygard. That's a total of 15 guys, and realistically only 5 of them are UFAs or RFAs next season. That's just a side note for you. I always like to remind you. But, right, that's 15 guys, and then expanded rosters. Okay, if you get up to 27, you might be able to add a forward, but that's a pretty solid group for what the Oilers have achieved this season with 15 or so forwards. That's a pretty solid group of guys that can get the job done in the playoffs based on what we've seen so far this season. But thing is, right, injuries, they could derail things in the playoffs if guys aren't fit, shaped up, and ready to go. And that's where I think really the expanded rosters idea takes off in my mind, is obviously you'd have expand either 25, 27, and then you have your select call-ups as well. So there's a lot to be considered. And I think the one part for it is for Oilers fans, as much as I still haven't read that Broberg article, and I should have, I wouldn't even consider Broberg in all this. I'd be hard on considering Mr. Evan Bouchard. That's the guy I'd be focusing on, because it'd be an interesting task, right? A guy who absolutely tore up the AHL this year and now would get a shot in the NHL playoffs in case of injury. That's an interesting scenario. Guys, let me know your thoughts. I need to get some thoughts on it, because I think, again, the goaltending situation's an interesting one. The defensive one's an interesting one. The forward group, that's a little bit more solid. The forward group's a little bit more solid, stable, and not so hard to answer exactly how the Oilers should approach it. But the defense and the goaltending is really where it gets complicated for us in any expanded roster situation. But even in a non-expanded roster situation, right, still, do you start Koskinen over Smith or Smith over Koskinen? Who do you go with for 14 forwards? The questions are absolutely endless, and guys, that's why I wanted to talk about it today. I'm Tyson, this is Dolynny TV. I am up on out of here.